Hello everyone, my name is Prithvi Patil and this video is about who you should vote for from the national security perspective. The 2019 Lok Sabha election is a very unique election. It's unique in the sense that for the first time since independence, or at least in recent memory, that the Lok Sabha election has focused so much on a subject called as national security. In 2016, a Pakistani Senate report committee mentioned, and I quote, "Not since 1971 has Indian government gone to the extent of pressurizing Pakistan as is being done by Modi regime." Now let's reflect on the statement a bit. What is it that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is doing that prime ministers before him, governments before him have not done? Now, to answer this question, I would like to go back to an interview that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then candidate Narendra Modi, gave to a TV channel, in which he says पाकिस्तान को उसी भाषा में जवाब देना चाहिए जो भाषा वो समझता हो. And in response, the anchor asked him, what if the international community builds up pressure against India? What if the international community stops India from retaliating against Pakistan? To which he answered, 125 करोड़ का देश है, पूरी दुनिया पे दबाव बनाने की काबिलियत हम रखते हैं. And 5 years down the line, in 2019, it's very clear that Prime Minister Modi has walked the talk. You look at Pakistan's situation today. Pakistan is on the verge of bankruptcy. Pakistan is actively seeking an IMF bailout to remedy the situation, which is not clear if it's going to happen. Pakistan finds itself on the FATF grey list, and by its own admission, being on the grey list is costing it around $10 million annually. Pakistan is completely isolated diplomatically, and I don't mean just the Western powers like France, Britain and United States. Even Pakistan's own Islamic neighbors such as Afghanistan and Iran, they have very poor relations with Pakistan. Often they engage in border skirmishes. And of course, now I'm going to talk about the military dimension. Balakot airstrikes, the 2016 surgical strikes. You see, the 2016 surgical strikes and Balakot strikes by the Narendra Modi government, they mark a paradigm shift in India's policy towards Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. For 30 odd years, Pakistan basically had a simple logic. It said India is much superior to us conventionally. They have a larger army, more well-equipped army. We can never defeat them conventionally speaking. They tried 4 times, failed every single time. All the 4 wars that Pakistan started with India, it has lost them. So for 30 years, the logic more or less that Pakistan employed was, we have nuclear weapons, so we are going to use that nuclear weapon as a shield, and we're going to threaten India that should it use its conventional forces to respond to our terrorism, we're going to press that button. So guess what? Balakot airstrikes called Pakistan's nuclear bluff. Now let's speak about China. It's very interesting that most Indians tend to fixate on Pakistan. But the reality is that Pakistan, although it has a huge nuisance value, it simply does not have the ingredients, or let's say the wherewithal, to pose the kind of comprehensive strategic threat that China does. Now, we have had a very difficult relationship with China. We have an ongoing dispute, a border dispute with China. The only war that India has ever lost, that was in 1962. We lost to China thanks to Jawaharlal Nehru's strategic blindness towards China. And ever since then, we have carried a kind of a psychological weakness against China, which is also let us say made worse with their superiority as far as a conventional military capability goes. Now, as far as China is concerned, it's very interesting, I find, that people have forgotten about the Doklam crisis. In 2017, for about 2 months, India and China had long border standoff. It was a 72-day standoff It was eyeball to eyeball confrontation. We were basically the confrontation was sparked by Chinese wish to make inroads, to develop to do some construction activities in Doklam territory, which belongs to Bhutan, a nation which we have a strategic agreement of mutual defense. We owe it to them. We have to take care of them. And more than that, our own strategic interests were threatened because Doklam is at striking distance from Siliguri corridor, the so-called India's chicken neck. The Siliguri corridor is what connects northeastern part of India with the rest of the country. Now, how did Prime Minister Modi tackle China on this issue? So China basically miscalculated in this particular case. It thought that just like the previous Indian governments and the way it has gone on to threaten and bully its neighbors, it thought it could do the same this time around too. But interestingly, for the first time under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, India stood its ground. We stood our ground there, and then China had to resort to all sorts of aggressive, threatening maneuvers. China used different communication channels to issue all different kinds of threats, provocations. We were reminded of our 1962 defeat, but the Indian Army did not budge, and at the end of it, after 72 days of confrontation, finally both the countries decided to go back to our pre-confrontation sites. So the choice before the Indian voter is very clear. On one hand, you have a strong and stable government under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a government which is going to be very sensitive to matters of national security. And on the other hand, you have a circus of political parties who have no consensus amongst them. Forget about matters such as national security. They don't even have a common minimum program. The only thing that unites them is hatred for a man called as Narendra Modi. 2019 Lok Sabha election is a fight between competence and entitlement. 2019 Lok Sabha election is a fight about niyat and kabiliyat. Not all of us can join the Indian Army. Not all of us can become a wing commander like Abhinandan. Not all of us can become a scientist for DRDO and work on a missile, let's say. But there is one thing that all of us can do for national security, and that is to vote. Voting is not just a fundamental right, it's also a fundamental responsibility. So let us all today pledge that we're going to vote in large numbers, and we're going to do our bit for a strong, secure, prosperous India. Jai Hind. The last thing I want to discuss is internal security. As far as internal security is concerned, an Indian voter just needs to look at one document, and that is the Congress Party's manifesto. At the first glance, the thing that strikes you the most is, while Prime Minister Narendra Modi is working day and night to help with India's ease of doing business ranking, it appears that Congress Party is working towards ease of doing terrorism in India. I mean, look at some of their policy points. The first thing that they want to do is abolish sedition. So basically, Deshadroh, anti-national activity, is not going to be a punishable offense. I think it's section 124A of IPC. They want to remove that. So it appears that Congress Party thinks that the Indian voter, a typical Indian voter, is part of the Tukde gang. The second thing they want to do is they want to review AFSPA and dilute it. So AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, it is that part of Indian legislature that gives special powers to men in uniform when they're conducting operations in areas like Kashmir and other areas infected with Maoist insurgents. So if you take away this law, what it essentially means is you're exposing these men to normal laws, and they won't be able to conduct their operations. The third thing, which is I think the most dangerous of all the three things, and that is the seemingly innocuous point about providing for a law of asylum. So basically, what they are saying is we are going to legalize all illegal immigrants into India. Primarily, two groups: Bangladeshi illegal immigrants and the Rohingyas. Now, the interesting thing about these two groups is they have been getting into India illegally for decades, especially the Bangladeshi immigrants. And the most striking thing about Rohingya immigrants is that they cross into India from West Bengal. And the largest settlement of Rohingya immigrants today is in Jammu. I'm not talking of Jammu and Kashmir, it's in Jammu. So the distance between West Bengal and Jammu is approximately 2000 kilometers. So it is very suspicious as to why a group would travel all the way from the eastern frontier of India to the northernmost part, Jammu. So it's clearly an attempt to change the demography of Jammu so that India can kiss Jammu Kashmir goodbye once and for all. So I mentioned the 2016 surgical strikes. I mentioned the daring Balakot strikes, which was a watershed moment in India's strategic calculus. I mentioned the Doklam crisis when India stood up for itself. I mentioned the disruptive, game-changing, I have not mentioned that yet, the anti-satellite test that DRDO conducted. So the question is, why is it that Prime Minister Modi is able to do these tough choices, is able to make these tough choices, is able to take these difficult decisions in India's larger national interests, and others have failed? The answer is quite simple: towards political will. Political will is of paramount importance for national security. A nation can have all sorts of resources. It could have the most competent army, it could have the most ferocious air force, it can have all sorts of weaponry, all sorts of technology, but none of this makes any difference if the person sitting on the Prime Minister's chair does not have political will to make decisions for the country when they ought to be done. And that is what makes Prime Minister Narendra Modi different. That's what sets him apart, and that is precisely why the country needs him again